No doubt about it, this film is one of the most unforgettable masterpieces I've ever covered as a Korean movie commentator, and it's easily one of the strongest contenders to rival New World as a top-tier gangster epic. It lays bare the treachery and scheming within a gangster family so thoroughly that I had to watch it more than 3 times before I even dared to break it down for you, because if you only watch it once, you'll be completely lost. And this epic also taught me what a real spy within a spy story looks like. As the old saying goes, all hustle and bustle is for profit, and nowhere is that more true than in the world of gangsters, where everything boils down to one word: greed. In Korea, there's a place called Gangneung, and it's absolutely crawling with gangster. Street fights are a daily occurrence, and while some people get their tendons cut, others straight up get their throats slit, making every local live in constant fear. But while all the gang leaders were busy fighting over territory, none of them realized that an unexpected visitor from China was slowly devouring them from the inside out. At a port in Gangneung one day, a group of men were sorting through their recent catch at sea when they suddenly spotted an unfamiliar ship in the distance. They tried sending a signal to the vessel, but got no response, and the ship eerily drifted right toward them. A few of the men decided to check it out, but the moment they reached the window, a sickening stench hit their noses, and when they reached the cabin door, they found blood smeared everywhere. Following the trail of blood, one man opened a container, only to find a decaying corpse inside, and the sight made everyone break into a cold sweat. What was even more shocking was that in the corner of the ship sat a man holding a knife, and one of the men realized with horror that the body wasn't just killed, it had been eaten. The man with the knife was a stowaway from mainland China, named Lee Min-suk. Not long after, the local crime boss Kim Gil-suk was busy hosting a special wedding celebration for one of his men when a subordinate suddenly rushed over to his trusted right-hand man, Kim Hyung-gun, and whispered something urgent in his ear. Hearing this, Kim Hyung-gun immediately sensed trouble, and after passing the message to Gil-suk, the boss took a deep breath and quickly gathered his crew to head to the scene. But when they arrived, they were stopped by an officer named Old Ryu. Turns out, someone in Gil-suk's crew had been openly using drugs, and since Ryu was the lead officer overseeing Gangneung, he had long been connected to these gang bosses. Normally, he would cover for them, and this time was no exception, but he still gave Kim Gil-suk a warning. This kind of thing better never happen again. So after getting rid of Officer Ryu, Gil-suk stormed into the room where the drugs had been used. Inside the room, 2 couples were high on drugs, and if they had arrived any later, things could have gotten completely out of hand, so Kim Gil-suk immediately started beating them without hesitation.
진짜로 약을 하고 있네.
Just as Gil-suk finished speaking, a group of men suddenly burst into the room. Clearly, they were the ones who brought the drugs, and it looked like a fight was about to break out until they recognized Gil-suk and immediately lowered their heads. At that moment, another man walked in behind them, shoved the others aside, took one look around, and left without saying a word. Later, the 3 main gang leaders sat together, waiting for the chairman to arrive. Once the chairman showed up, I finally understood what gangster etiquette looked like. When they poured drinks, everyone first emptied their own glass, then refilled it with the chairman's pour, and they only drank after the chairman did, always turning their heads to the side before downing the shot. The chairman came with one clear goal: to resolve the conflict among the 3 brothers. He singled out Hyun-gun, warning him that if he ever got another bag of drugs from Lee Min-suk in Gangneung, he'd better start preparing for his funeral. Then he gave each of them a stern warning, especially Ah-gwang, the bald-headed eldest. As the big brother, he needed to start acting like one. The next day, Lee Min-suk, who had been in Korea for some time now, was working under the Black Dragon Syndicate, mainly in loan sharking. But that day, he called over a man, first asking how much debt he owed. When the man replied 7 million won, Lee Min-suk said he'd cancel the debt, but only if the guy helped him with one job. They drove to a villa, entered a room, and inside sat none other than the Black Dragon's boss. Lee Min-suk didn't beat around the bush. He straight up said he wanted shares in the new Gangneung resort project. But the Black Dragon boss told him those shares had already been handed over to President Shin, and warned Lee not to overstep. He'd already been given a loan company. Lee Min-suk clearly didn't care. Hearing this, the Black Dragon boss started to look annoyed. He slowly took a seat, gave Lee Min-suk a long, hard look, and told him to weigh his own power carefully. He pushed further. I've worked 10 years for the Black Dragon, been loyal, killed dozens of people, and now you won't even give me this? The boss just scoffed, but little did he know, Lee had never planned to negotiate. He unbuttoned one part of his coat.
되는 거 본 적이 없거든요.
Just like that, the defiant Black Dragon boss became another victim of Lee Min-suk's blade. Lee then looked at the woman beside him, and by the time police arrived at the scene, the villa was a massacre, bodies strewn downstairs, and 2 cold corpses in the boss's room. The only person left alive was the man Lee had brought, who handed over the murder weapon without resistance. Clearly, he was there to take the fall. At the same time, Kim Gil-suk had been summoned by the chairman to his home. Seeing the chairman hard at work, Gil-suk bent down to help him pick up some chili peppers. Once finished, they went up to the rooftop of the building. After a few pleasantries, the chairman asked Gil-suk whether he'd be interested in taking over the Gangneung resort. Gil-suk was clearly caught off guard. Based on seniority or territory, that job should have gone to either Agwang or Hyun-gun. Why give it to him? He tried to refuse, not wanting to create a rift between the brothers over this, but the chairman explained his reasoning among the shareholders. One person was becoming unstable. It was obvious he was talking about Lee Min-suk, and with that, the two left the building. After killing the Black Dragon boss, Lee Min-suk formed his own faction. One day, President Shin, who was once part of the Black Dragon, showed up at Lee's place uninvited. He didn't outright accuse Lee of killing the chairman. He had no proof, but he did lay out the results of his investigation.
우리 회장님 당근 새끼가 보니까 빚이 있더라. 참 이상하지. 회장님께서 갑자기 지분 넘긴 것도 이상하고 100% 지분 먹은 새끼가 범인인데 너무 대놓고 하니까 이렇게인가 아닌가 해.
It was clear what he meant, and he issued a harsh warning. If the killer ever ended up in his hands, he'd make him regret it. Lee Min-suk didn't respond, and instead went straight to see Kim Gil-suk, who was in the middle of a meeting about the resort project. Gil-suk didn't recognize him at first, only realizing who he was after Lee introduced himself as the new shareholder. They went down to the river for a chat. Lee started by apologizing for the earlier drug incident, claiming it was his own negligence that caused the drugs to reach Hyun-gun, but Gil-suk, being a seasoned veteran, saw right through it. Lee was just showing off his power. Gil-suk began probing into Lee's past. He said he didn't do business with people whose background he didn't know. Lee didn't hide anything. He said he always went after what he wanted, whether by killing for it or doing jobs no one else dared to. That's how he became the second largest shareholder. But no sooner had he said that than tensions flared between them. Lee just smirked and said, "Now that the biggest shareholder has spoken, I won't say much."
싫으면 지분도 사서 우리를 밀어내든가 아니면 관리는 신경을 꺼이지. 그게 맞지 않나?
Gil-suk thought that meant Lee was backing off, and invited him to share a meal, but Lee flicked his cigarette butt right into the food and walked away. Gil-suk frowned, but quickly let it go. With that incident behind them, one of Kim Gil-suk's men held his wedding, but just as the guests were celebrating, Hyun-gun stormed in, kicked over the wedding stage, and left everyone frozen in fear. He began questioning Kim Gil-suk, asking if the resort project had really been handed over to him. Hearing this, Kim Gil-suk understood why Hyun-gun was so furious. With no other choice, he explained that he had actually tried to refuse, but the chairman insisted, and there was nothing he could do. Hyun-gun didn't say anything more. He just pulled out a wad of cash from his wallet, tossed it to the ground as his wedding gift, and walked away. Meanwhile, Lee Min-suk clearly wasn't planning to back down. Since he couldn't get the shares from Kim Gil-suk, he decided to go straight to the chairman himself. The chairman was surprised to see Lee and his man show up at his doorstep, but didn't know what they were after, so he let them in. Once inside, Lee casually picked up a sack and helped the chairman sort chili peppers, before asking if he was willing to sell him some shares. But the chairman's response was simple. Hadn't Lee already talked it over with Kim Gil-suk? Why was he coming to him now? Lee Min-suk got the message the chairman had rejected him, so without saying a word, he pulled out a knife and stabbed him repeatedly while he was off guard. The chairman tried to fight back but couldn't, and in the end, Lee Min-suk slit his throat. Afterwards, he did what he always does, left the weapon at the scene and made the woman he brought earlier stay behind to take the blame for his crime. The woman witnessed the entire scene, frozen in shock and completely paralyzed with fear. Just moments ago, they were lovers in the flesh. He thought they were about to become soulmates. When Kim Gil-suk got word of the chairman's condition, he rushed to the hospital, heart clenched tight as he saw the old man hanging on by a thread. But the worst came true. The chairman, despite the care, didn't survive. Outside the operating room, Kim Gil-suk was filled with rage. He couldn't understand who would dare attack a man over 70 years old. Still unable to make sense of it, he stormed into the police station and confronted the woman being interrogated. He knew it couldn't have been the woman in front of him. She simply wasn't capable of doing something like that. But the woman insisted it was all her doing. Helpless, Kim Gil-suk was dragged away by the police. Given everything that had happened, they had no choice but to take care of the chairman's funeral arrangements, and the cop from before told them the woman was deep in debt too, probably just another scapegoat for someone else. After the funeral, the three brothers gathered together to discuss how they would avenge the chairman's death, but Kim Gil-suk suggested they wait. He'd send Kim Hyung-gun to gather evidence of Lee Min-suk's drug trafficking, then use the law to bring him down. Hyun-gun wouldn't accept that the chairman was dead. What good was waiting? He stormed off angrily, leaving Kim Gil-suk frustrated. Kim Hyun-gun got to work immediately. He quietly tailed a few of Lee Min-suk's men, and once they entered a bar, he raided the place and captured them all. At the scene, the men were already hanging from the ceiling, but as a seasoned gangster, Hyun-gun knew beatings alone wouldn't get him the info he needed. So he tried a different approach. He told one of the men that his mother had cancer, and that Lee Min-suk hadn't paid a cent for her treatment. If the man revealed the location of Lee's next drug deal, Hyun-gun promised to cover the medical bills and even hire a personal nurse for her care. The man hadn't expected that, but for his mother's sake, he gave in and spilled everything he knew. With first-hand intel in hand, Hyun-gun passed it to the police. The police wasted no time setting up a full operation. As Lee Min-suk's men picked up the drugs at a gas station, officers began tailing them quietly. Lee himself was also under surveillance. The moment he moved, they'd strike. At the same time, Hyun-gun and Gwang were ready to launch their own attack if the police failed. They'd take out Lee Min-suk's crew themselves and seize everything, but no one expected that Lee's men would suddenly spot a suspicious car tailing them. They quickly called Lee Min-suk and reported it, then split up with the goods. The police sent backup to follow. Soon after, Lee's crew slipped up, with cops on their heels. They tried to escape but were swiftly taken down. Old Ryu finally breathed a sigh of relief, convinced that one bag contained drugs and the other had the money. But when the police searched the bags, they were completely empty. It confirmed the old saying, when things go too smoothly, something's off. The two arrested men burst out laughing as the police realized they'd been played. They had no choice but to let them go. Old Ryu heard the news and could only shake his head helplessly. What no one knew was that right after the police let them go, another one of Lee's men showed up at the gas station. A woman discreetly handed him a package, and inside was a bag full of drugs. At the same time, Hyun-gun heard that the police had been tricked, just as he suspected. Nothing was ever that easy, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. But just as he was about to strike, he realized that Gwang wasn't moving at all.
화조정 형님 뭐예요? 안 가요?
The lights suddenly went out, and everyone knew something was wrong. The next moment, they were ambushed. Gwang stood up with a knife, and Hyun-gun was stunned. He never expected this plot twist to happen in real life. Gwang had betrayed them at the most critical moment, and it was too late for Hyun-gun to react. Outside, the fight turned into chaos. Hyun-gun's men, caught off guard and surrounded by Longhair's crew, suffered heavy casualties. Kim Gil-suk's top enforcer, Shao, was attacked by several thugs and quickly beaten down. Longhair dragged him by the leg and sliced his tendon, leaving him screaming in pain on the ground. Kim Gil-suk had no idea that Gwang had turned on them and was now helping Lee Min-suk launch a surprise attack. Just as the badly injured Hyun-gun called, their side was suddenly blinded by headlights. A car came crashing toward them and slammed Kim Hyun-gun into the air. But more of Lee Min-suk's men jumped out and stabbed him. He fought back fiercely and managed to knock down several of them, only to get stabbed again from behind. Hyun-gun came to the rescue, pushing the attacker away, but took multiple stab wounds himself. Barely holding on, Gil-suk tackled the man and took him down. Police sirens wailed in the distance, finally scaring the gang off, but their headquarters had already become a blood-soaked battlefield, filled with bodies and wounded men. 3 months later, Lee Min-suk was still on the hunt for Kim Gil-suk and his men. That's because Kim Gil-suk now held the largest share of the resort project, and it made things very difficult for Lee. But what he didn't expect was that, just as he walked out of a building one day, he found Kim Gil-suk standing there waiting for him. The move caught Lee completely off guard, and the two of them returned to the same restaurant where they'd first met. This time, Kim Gil-suk came with a simple purpose: to negotiate with Lee Min-suk. He wanted to split the business down the middle, hoping both sides could put an end to the bloodshed. But Lee didn't give him any face. He repeated his old line, "Talking is the most useless thing in the world." He told Kim Gil-suk not to bother saying anything more, either fight back now, or wait for him to take everything. With that, he turned and walked away. The look in Kim Gil-suk's eyes turned cold. If Lee insisted on playing dirty, then he'd play along to the end. Before making his move, He first gave Officer Ryu a heads up. Although Ryu didn't approve of what Kim was about to do, there was nothing he could do to stop him, and Kim Gil-suk clearly wasn't going to give up his plan just because of a few words. So after leaving, Kim Gil-suk went to see President Shin from Lee's former syndicate. A while ago, President Shin had come to Kim asking for help after being pushed out by Lee, but was flatly rejected. Now that Kim was the one asking for help, Shin couldn't resist mocking him. He said even if Kim got Lee's shares, he'd still be second in command. Those shares were originally his anyway. But this time, Kim Gil-suk came with sincerity. He offered to give Shin his own shares if they took down Lee Min-suk. Kim would keep only the smaller portion. Shin was surprised by how much Kim was willing to give up, and so he agreed to join forces to take Lee down. Once the deal was made, Kim began preparing an office for Shin. It was clear as soon as Lee was dead, the shares would be handed over. Meanwhile, Longhair got word that Kim was planning to hand over his shares. He immediately passed the message on to Lee Min-suk, leaving the next move in Lee's hands. At the same time, Kim Gil-suk also approached Guang. After all, Guang had betrayed the gang and killed Hyun-gun, so now it was time to settle the score. Guang finally explained why he turned traitor. He said Lee Min-suk once asked him a question, "Are you really okay with this?" He went on to say that he had worked his way up from the streets, and everything he'd ever done was for control of Gangneung's harbor, and now that it was all being taken away, he couldn't accept it. Kim Gil-suk said nothing more. He simply walked away, because no matter how angry he was, he couldn't bring himself to kill his own brother, so the job fell to one of his men, and thus, Guang, once a powerful gangster, met his end. Soon after, a group of Lee Min-suk's men arrived at Kim Gil-suk's newly established office. They were clearly there with bad intentions, ready to wipe out everyone inside. But once they entered, they sensed something was wrong. The room was empty. At that moment, Kim Hyun-gun entered from behind. The men looked down and saw gasoline stains all over the floor. Without hesitation, Hyun-gun flicked his cigarette to the ground, revealing that the whole thing had been a trap. As the fire roared to life, the men outside began sealing the doors to trap everyone inside. But at the very last second, one man managed to escape. Kim Hyun-gun's crew tried to finish the job, but Hyun-gun held them back. He wanted to handle it himself after all. Last time, this guy had ambushed him. The two started to brawl, fists flying fast. In just a few moves, Hyun-gun had the man on the ground. After the man uttered his final words, one of Shin's henchmen stepped in to deliver the finishing blow. At that same moment, Lee Min-suk was leaving one of his hideouts when Officer Ryu appeared. Without saying much, Ryu threw a warrant in Lee's face. He was under arrest. Lee looked stunned. He had no idea what evidence the police had found or how they got the warrant, but there was no way out now. He could only follow Ryu and leave quietly. What was more terrifying, though, was that after Kim Gil-suk's men finished cleaning up the scene, they reached out to President Shin, and Shin's message was clear: once Lee Min-suk was dead, Kim Gil-suk would be next. What no one saw coming was that Longhair, Lee's right-hand man, had already been turned by Shin. But as Longhair and Shin walked down the street, a figure emerged from a nearby car. It was Kim Gil-suk's wounded subordinate, the one whose tendon had been sliced. He silently followed the two men. Before long, Shin and Longhair sensed something wasn't right. Just as things were falling apart, Kim Hyun-gun made his move. This was a trap within a trap. Shin thought he was using Kim Gil-suk as bait to kill Lee Min-suk, but Kim had turned the tables and used Shin to seize control of everything. One of Shin's men had been bribed by Kim, and the car instantly turned into a living hell. With his men dead, Shin also fell in a pool of blood, crawling in agony beside Longhair. Kim's subordinate stepped forward, grabbed Longhair's leg, and in a poetic twist, sliced through his tendon, just as his own had been. With Lee Min-suk and Shin's forces wiped out, Kim Gil-suk wasn't going to let the cops take Lee away, because he knew Ryu didn't really have a warrant. Ryu stepped out of the car, trying to negotiate.
네 이름 뭐 하는데? 뭘 하긴? 공무집행 중이지. 영장이 나온 적이 없다던데.
Kim's words made him nervous. What he was doing was illegal, and he knew it, so he gave Kim a warning. Lee Min-suk couldn't be harmed. They had to take him in. He got back in the car and drove off, but as the car rolled away, Lee Min-suk began to suspect something. He asked Ryu if the warrant was fake. Ryu just told him to keep quiet. He was trying to save him. What Ryu didn't know was that Lee had hidden a knife under his foot. Without warning, Lee lunged and stabbed the officers in the car. The vehicle swerved violently and flew off the road. Everyone watching from Kim's crew was completely stunned. Lee Min-suk slowly crawled out of the wreck. He wasn't afraid. He walked straight toward Kim Gil-suk and his men. A final showdown was inevitable. As the last enemy fell, Lee collapsed on top of a body, exhausted. Kim Gil-suk watched silently from a distance. Knowing that it was time for everything to come to an end, he let Lee approach, step by staggering step, but Lee could barely walk. The fight was long gone from him. Kim stepped forward and knocked him down, then snapped his hand and forced him to kneel, just like the chairman had. But even in his final moments, Lee Min-suk wasn't afraid.
네가 이겼다는 거 표정 말이야. 정말 웃겨.
And as his last words echoed in the air, Kim Gil-suk drove the final blade into his body, and so did the story.